Most people spend $1,500 on a DAC and amp, then stream into it from a $50 dongle running Spotify at 160 kilobits per second and wonder why it doesn't sound like the demo at the shop. The truth is that a $79 streamer running bit-perfect Tidal into a decent DAC will outperform a $2,000 streamer running lossy audio E. And the audiophile forums that won't tell you this are the same ones running ads for the brands selling you the $2,000 box. So the question worth asking is, what does the guy with the $15,000 system actually have sitting in his rack, and why does it cost less than your lunch? I have a shelf in my listening room. On the left end of that shelf sits a streamer that cost me $2,400. I bought it 4 years ago because a reviewer I trusted called it a landmark product. On the right end of the same shelf, there is a small white box about the size of a deck of playing cards. It cost $89. My friend David, who has spent more on his speaker cables than most people spend on a car, uses the same one. He heard mine, asked what it was, looked it up on his phone, laughed a little, and ordered one that afternoon. The $2,400 unit is still there because I haven't bothered to sell it. I don't use it. I use the $89 one. That shelf is the whole story of this video, really. But let me back up and tell you how I got there, because the path matters, and because the mistake I made is the same mistake I see in every beginner forum, every Facebook group, every Reddit thread about getting started in streaming audio. I got into hi-fi streaming the way most people do. I had a decent system, nothing exotic, a Cambridge audio amp, a pair of Wharfdale bookshelf speakers that sounded genuinely good, and a DAC I'd bought secondhand for $200 that measured better than anything in my price range. I was happy. Then I started reading about streamers, about the difference between having music on a hard drive connected to a laptop versus a dedicated network streamer, about noise floors and jitter and galvanic isolation, about how the source matters, how garbage in means garbage out, how the rest of your chain can only be as good as what you feed it. So I made the classic beginner error. I assumed the streamer was where you put the money. I bought something expensive, and for about 3 months I told myself I could hear the difference. I sat in my listening chair, closed my eyes, and willed myself to hear whatever $2,400 was supposed to sound like. Sometimes I thought I did. Then my friend David walked in, plugged in his phone via the auxiliary input for comparison, and I couldn't reliably tell which was which on a track I'd listened to 100 times. That was an uncomfortable afternoon. The thing is, I'm not alone in this. I've talked to dozens of people since then who made the same mistake in the same direction. They spent real money on the streamer because the streamer felt like the frontier, felt like the place where the technology was moving, felt like the obvious place to invest. And meanwhile, their downstream components, their DAC, their amp, were bought on what was left over, which is exactly backwards, exactly wrong. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book you can buy in our pinned comment below. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. So if the $2,400 streamer doesn't actually sound better than the $89 one, why does every reviewer tell you it does? That's what I want to get into now, because the answer isn't flattering, but it is useful. The review industry for hi-fi equipment runs on advertising. Not exclusively, and there are honest reviewers out there, but the incentive structure is what it is. The brands that buy ads in Stereophile, in What Hi-Fi, in the half-dozen Audiophile YouTube channels with serious production budgets, those are the brands that get coverage. Cambridge Audio buys ads. WeM, which makes the $79 streamer I now use every day, does not have a PR department. It doesn't send review units to major publications. It doesn't fly journalists to its headquarters for a listening event. It makes good hardware, prices it honestly, and lets word of mouth do the work, which means it gets ignored by the press and discovered quietly by the people who actually measure things. That's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece is more interesting, and it's the thing that took me longest to understand. A streamer has one job. It takes audio data from a network source, Tidal, Qobuz, your NAS drive, whatever, and it passes that data intact to a DAC. That's it. The DAC converts the digital signal to analog. The amp drives the speakers. The streamer is the delivery truck. And here's the part that should rearrange how you think about this. If the delivery truck delivers the package intact, it doesn't matter whether the truck cost $80,000 or $12,000. The package is the same. In audio terms, that's called bit-perfect output. If the streamer outputs an exact digital copy of the file, every bit in the right place, nothing added, nothing dropped, no resampling, no volume control engaged, then it has done its job perfectly, and the $79 Weem Mini does this. So does the $149 Weem Pro. So does an $85 Raspberry Pi running free open source software. Once you're bit perfect, you're bit perfect. There is no more bit perfect. Now, someone is going to write in the comments about jitter. Jitter is timing variation in the digital signal, and yes, it's real, and yes, at high enough levels, it degrades sound quality. Here is what the measurements show. Jitter becomes audible to humans somewhere above 10 nanoseconds. The Weem Mini measures at roughly 50 picoseconds. A picosecond is 1,000th of a nanosecond. We are not in audible territory. We are not close to audible territory. We are in territory so far below the audibility threshold that arguing about it is like arguing about whether your car runs better when it's facing north. What people get wrong is chasing specs on paper, jitter numbers, noise floors, dynamic range, without asking whether those numbers are in a range that matters to human hearing. The audiophile press has built an entire vocabulary around the space between technically measurable and audible, and they've made a great living there. Don't live there. Live in the space that affects what you actually hear. Here's the counterintuitive truth, and once I say it, I think you'll recognize it immediately. The app matters more than the hardware. A $2,000 streamer with a clunky app that resamples on the fly, that drops its Tidal Connect session every 20 minutes, that takes 45 seconds to load your library. That streamer is worse to live with than an $89 one whose app is fast, stable, and updated every 3 weeks. You're not listening to hardware. You're listening to software running on hardware. And in the budget streamer market, the software gap has closed almost entirely in the last 3 years. All right, let's talk about the actual units. 5 of them, starting at the bottom. The Weem Mini, $79, roughly the size of a hockey puck. Runs on a USB cable you can pull off any old phone charger. Has an optical output and a 3.5mm analog out. Supports AirPlay 2, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect, Qobuz, Amazon Music HD, and iHeartRadio natively. The app, the Weem Home app, is genuinely, honestly good. It's fast. It's updated constantly. The interface feels like it was designed by someone who actually uses streamers. You can browse by album, by artist, by folder structure if you're feeding it local files from a NAS. You can set your EQ. You can schedule a wake-up stream if you want NPR at 7 a.m. without touching your phone. Here is the trick with the Weem Mini, and it is worth stopping to write this down if you are going to buy one. When you first open the app, the volume output is set to variable by default. Variable output means the Weem is doing digital volume control. It's attenuating the signal in the digital domain before it leaves the box. Digital attenuation degrades the signal. If you are feeding this into a proper amp with its own volume control, you want the streamer to output at full, fixed volume and let the amp do the work. Go into settings, go to audio output, set it to fixed. Takes 30 seconds. Most people never do it. It matters. That's the whole trick. Next up is the Weem Pro, $149, adds several things the Mini doesn't have. A built-in DAC, and not a bad one. It measures with a total harmonic distortion plus noise figure of 0.0003%, which is better than plenty of standalone DACs in the $200 range. Coaxial digital output alongside the optical, a USB-A port for a thumb drive, analog inputs, including a phono input for a turntable with an cartridge. If you have a turntable and you want to bring it into a streaming system without a separate phono stage, the Weem Pro solves that in one box for $149. The trick here is which output to use. If you're feeding an external DAC, which I'd recommend if you have a good one, use the coaxial out, not the RCA out. The coaxial carries the pure digital signal. The RCA out has already gone through the onboard DAC and conversion. Measure for measure, the coaxial path to an external DAC consistently delivers a lower noise floor. Now we go slightly sideways. The Audiophiles S5O Pro Plus, also $149. You probably haven't heard of it unless you've spent time on Dutch or German audiophile forums, where it has a small but serious following. It has a balanced XLR output, which no WM in this price range offers. If your amp or DAC takes balanced inputs, XLR is a cleaner path, longer cable runs, better common mode noise rejection. It supports DLNA, AirPlay 2, and Spotify Connect. The onboard app, called 4Stream, is honestly not great. It works, but it's slower and less polished than WM Home. Here is the trick with the Audiophiles. Don't use the 4Stream app. The device itself is fully compatible with mConnect Player, which is a third-party control app you can download for about $4. It's faster, has a better library view, and handles gapless playback more reliably. The Audiophiles with mConnect Player is a different product from the Audiophiles with 4Stream, better in almost every way. Moving up to the highest price point in this video, the Volumio Primo, $299 for the base edition. This is a purpose-built hardware device running Volumio OS, which is open-source software with a long development history and a large community. It is Roon-ready certified, which matters if you're in the Roon ecosystem. It handles local library management beautifully. It will play from USB drives, NAS drives, network shares, and all the major streaming services. The sound quality out of the optical or coaxial output is bit perfect. Here is the trick. The $299 base Primo uses a standard switching power supply, and switching supplies introduce noise. Volumio sells a higher spec version called the Primo Hi-Fi Edition for $399 that includes an isolated linear power stage that genuinely measures better, lower noise floor, cleaner output. That's worth $100 if you're already spending $299. But if you want the same result for less, buy the base $299 Primo and add an iFi iPower supply for $29. Same improvement, $70 cheaper. The iPower is filtered DC. It cleans up the supply noise. The Primo running on an iPower measures nearly identically to the Hi-Fi edition. That's not my opinion. That's what the measurements show. And then there's the fifth option, which is less a product and more a project, and which I include because it is what I actually run in my main system. A Raspberry Pi 4, a case, a power supply, and a software image called Mood Audio. Total cost, depending on how you source the parts, somewhere between $85 and $120. Mood Audio is free, open source, and regularly updated. It is Roon ready. It supports Spotify Connect, AirPlay 2, and can output to any USB DAC or to any HAT that's hardware attached on top, which is a small board that clips onto the Pi's GPIO pins and adds a DAC or output stage. The trick here is the Allo Boss 2HAT, which costs $35 and turns the Pi into a streamer that measures ease in terms of noise floor and dynamic range, essentially identically to dedicated hardware costing $600. I've seen the measurements. I've heard both. In a blind test with controlled conditions, I cannot reliably tell them apart. Now, some people will hear Raspberry Pi and immediately feel like this is not for them. And if you're not comfortable setting up a Linux system with a touchscreen interface, that's fair. Use the WM. It's simpler and it's genuinely excellent. But if you're comfortable with an hour of reading and following a step-by-step guide, the Pi Plus Mood is the reference class solution in this price range. The audiophile community has known this for years. It just didn't fit in any print magazine. Let me zoom out now because I think there's a bigger point here worth making. The hi-fi industry, like most industries, has an incentive to make you believe that better sounds more expensive. Some of the time, that's true. A better amp does generally cost more than a worse amp, and the difference is audible. A better speaker does generally cost more and sound better. The component hierarchy is real. But the streamer, the delivery truck, is a category where the price-to-performance curve flattens almost completely above about $150. Not because nobody makes better hardware above that price. They do. They make beautiful hardware, with machined aluminum casings and illuminated displays and remote controls that feel like they came from a Japanese watch manufacturer. You are paying for all of that. You are not paying for better sound. The sound is the same. Every dollar you move from the streamer budget to the DAC budget will be audible. Every dollar you move from the DAC budget to the amp budget will be audible. Every dollar you spend above $150 on a streamer is mostly buying a nicer app icon. That's not cynicism. That's what the measurements show, and more importantly, that's what the listening tests show when you control the variables properly. My system today, Weem Mini feeding a topping E3 ODAC via optical, E3 O into an SMSLSA 400 amp, Wharfdale Diamond 12.2 speakers, total cost including all cables and stands, about $680. Friends who visit with $3,000 systems hear it and ask what I'm running. That conversation happens regularly. The answer is never satisfying to people who've spent more money, but the measurements and the listening are the measurements and the listening. Here's what I want you to do tonight. Download the Weem Home app, which is free. There's a 14-day trial mode that lets you explore the interface and connect to Tidal or Spotify before you buy any hardware. Spend 20 minutes with it. See whether the app is something you'd want to live with. If it is, the Mini is $79. That's the entry. And when you set it up, the first thing you do, before you play a single track, is go into Settings and set Output to Fixed. 30 seconds. Done. Everything downstream gets a cleaner signal from that moment on. Tell me in the comments what you're currently streaming into, your DAC, your amp, your speakers, whatever you've got. I read every one of them, and I'll tell you where your actual bottleneck is. Because for most people in this hobby, the bottleneck is not the streamer. And knowing that is worth more than anything I've told you today. Next time, I'm going to show you the one cable upgrade that costs $12 and genuinely closes the gap between a $200 DAC and a $600 one. I've got the measurement graphs. I've run the listening tests. The cable companies are going to hate this video, and I cannot wait to make it. Stay with me.